So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today, and the reason why we are calling this presentation Take-Home Tech, is because I think a lot of our patients are pretty intimidated by technology, maybe fearful of using it, and have the perception that they can't afford it or they won't be able to really use it in their home or outside the walls of the hospital. I think that we can kind of feel that way sometimes too as therapists. It can seem kind of intimidating to even delve into that world. So I'm hoping today to kind of demystify assistive tech a little bit for you guys and maybe even introduce some things that if you don't use them here, you can kind of give your patients a heads up that, hey, this stuff is out there. There are affordable ways for you to be more independent in your home, more safe in your home, able to access your devices, because that's really what this stuff can do. And the reason why I love working in assistive tech is it just feels like there's so many possibilities right now, so many solutions. And this stuff can really be the difference between somebody having to go to a facility at 35 years old or getting to live at home with good quality of life and maybe some caregiver support and these devices. So I added this in here because I just like to explain kind of my thought process if I get a new resident to QLI and I'm kind of thinking, all right, where do I want to start with this person in assistive tech? So step one is always looking at what current technology do they have? What devices do they already have in their possession? If we can, I don't want to recreate the wheel. And I think the nice thing now is there are so many cool accessibility features built into iPhones, Android tablets, even desktop computers now have a whole ease of access center if you have a Windows computer where you can tweak different things from a vision standpoint or even an interaction standpoint. I always give the example, sometimes when Alex is bringing people through for tours, I'll take out my iPhone and show them, did you know you can actually make a phone call and send a text message by moving your head left and right on your iPhone? You can. I can show you how to do it after the presentation if you're curious. But that's just a built-in feature now where it uses the camera in your iPhone and actually uses your head movement as a switch to control your device. And that's at no extra cost, just something that's built in. So we always want to look at that first. I think comfort level is obviously another huge one. If you're working with somebody who, we got somebody just recently that's from literally a village in Alaska. This kid is not real familiar with computers, so he does need an AAC system, but I know I'm going to have to start a little bit lower tech, a little less intimidating for this guy. I also have a gentleman who came to us from Maryland recently who owns his own IT company. So our sessions look a little bit different because he knows more than I do. So just thinking about what approach do you want to take? And then cognition. So we need to ask about this one because I need to know what someone's ability is like to take in that new information and apply it. If I'm working with somebody that's got some more severe cognitive impairments, it doesn't mean we can't find a device for them to use. It just means that we might need to implement a more strict errorless learning plan with their use of that device. And then cost is always a biggie. We can't avoid that in this world. So not everyone is fortunate enough to be funded by work comp. And even if I do have somebody that's work comp funded, I want to make sure I'm using their dollars wisely. So, you know, if the cost of a device is greater than the benefit, we need to consider that. But if this person could really benefit from this device and the benefit is greater than the cost, then maybe it's a good option for them. I also try and consider non-monetary costs. So if the training or the setup support is going to be way more than the family can do or the caregiver can do, it might not justify using that device and we might have to go another way. So that's just kind of a good place to start in terms of your decision making when using assistive tech. So rehab technology, that's just really a broad term. It can refer to just a low-tech device all the way to these crazy gee-whiz gadgets that we're seeing out here these days. We always want to start with introducing the device in a structured environment at QLI, but I also need to make sure that these are going to translate to their home use. So kind of like I was saying before, it doesn't make sense for me to get somebody completely trained on inefficient and using a device and then it ends up collecting dust in their closet when they go home. We need to make sure that it's going to translate into their home use. And like I said, I think that rehab technology is just such a booming area. It's hard to keep up with all of the changes that are happening and the new devices that are coming out. And, you know, while we don't have floating cars yet, there still are just like endlessly cool things happening in this area. So just would encourage you guys to stay on top of it as best you can. I think for me, people ask me that all the time. I set Google alerts. So I'll set a Google alert for stroke and environmental control units or stroke and assistive technology, brain injury and smart home control. And so if there's anything new that's coming out, I get emails about it. There's also some good blogs out there. Assistive Technology blog, that's all the name is a really good one. And I just have tons more. So if you guys are curious about some different accounts to follow, we are going to be starting an Assistive Tech Pinterest page. I don't know if I've even told you that, but it's happening. I'm working on it. So keep an eye on that too, because it's just hard to stay on top of rehab technology when it's ever changing. Obviously, there's just been a ton of change over time, and social stigma has been a big one. In the past, if you had an assistive technology device, it meant you were lugging around a huge Tobii Dynavox, and it was obvious that you were using something to compensate for your speech or your movement or whatever it might be. That's not the case anymore. Now we can compensate for memory with an Apple Watch. You can use an iPad for your AAC device to be a more effective communicator. No one even needs to know that you're using something to compensate for a deficit. These devices are also a lot more multidimensional now. So rather than just hitting on one area, we're seeing devices that can address physical impairments, speech impairments, cognitive impairments all in one. They're a lot more versatile. And then just from an accessibility standpoint, this is a biggie for us. You can get something now off the shelf from Target. You can order it from Amazon, have it appear in 2 days. There are just so many more devices out there that aren't not necessarily medical grade devices, and they're not even intended necessarily to be used with a disability population. But if you can kind of think outside the box a little bit, there's a lot of implications for use with the folks that we all work with. So I want to get right into a couple of different kinds of areas of assistive tech and how to access devices. Eye gaze is obviously going to be at like the top of the list for like highest technology that we would use for somebody to access the device. So the PCI Mini, this is a product by Tobii Dynavox. I don't have the PCI Mini, but I do have the PCI Go. So basically what this is it's just a USB eye tracker. It has software that comes with it. That's why the price is a little steeper on this one. The PCI Mini is $1,200. But basically what this lets you do is it's completely hands-free access of your computer. Downside, only works with Windows. We'll talk about that a little bit more. That's a trend you're going to hear. Apple doesn't play nice with others. But you can control really any Windows computer with this one. Insurance usually only pays for one of these if it's for communication purposes. So I've been happy to see that Tobii has also come out with the iX and the Tracker 4C. Those two devices are actually intended more for gaming. So they were actually created for game developers to incorporate eye gaze into gaming. But again, I'm seeing people use this for just control of their computer too. The iX was the first one. That one is, I think, $99. And then the Tracker 4C is $149. So that's a pretty affordable way for somebody with really high level impairment to access their computer. The Tracker 4C in particular is even a step better because it has a little bit of head tracking too. So you don't have to only rely on eye gaze, which is nice if you have somebody that maybe they've got a gaze restriction or something like that. It also uses just head control, head movement. The OptiKey has been really cool. This is completely open source software that you can just download. I can give you guys the link if you're interested. I think if you literally just Google OptiKey download, though, it'll come up. So what OptiKey is it's an on-screen keyboard that is intended to be used with any inexpensive eye tracker, kind of like those two that I just mentioned. So you can be using your eye tracker and just hover over the letters on your keyboard and it'll type them. There's some customization too with setting like the delay. So I am working with somebody who's using this kind of setup and he's just not quite quick enough to move to the next letter before it clicks. So you can set the delay longer. So he has to hover on the letter longer before it'll actually click it. So those have been some really cool developments that we've seen and options for eye gaze. And then some new things to talk about. I should probably just take iTribe out because they have been super disappointing. But iTribe, they were making a Tracker Pro, they called it, for $199. And it was like so good, like a really, really good affordable eye tracker. And they just kind of abruptly stopped development and were recently purchased by Facebook. Facebook owns Oculus virtual reality, so I'm guessing that that's what they're going to be using it for, is in incorporating eye gaze into virtual reality. But then Windows 10 eye control, if any of you guys have Windows 10, you might have seen that there's an eye control setting that's in beta mode right now. You can just turn it on your computer and use a low-cost eye tracker. And again, you can use eye gaze to open any app on your computer, to generate Word documents, to send emails. It even works in spreadsheets. So pretty cool that we're seeing these companies start to incorporate this stuff into their devices for people who have disabilities, so you don't have to pay extra to get a separate device. And then obviously as a therapist, there's some things you have to think about in terms of who's appropriate for eye gaze. It's fatiguing for sure, so you need to have somebody who's got pretty good cognitive endurance. And then from a vision impairment standpoint, I've had people use it who have maybe some mild vision impairment, but if somebody's got like nystagmus or their attention's really poor, this is going to be pretty hard for them to use. Any abnormal movement too, obviously, where your body's moving, your head is, your eyes are moving. So finding a way that they can use it where they'll be kind of stable in terms of their posture. And then just thinking, what do you want to use it for? Do you want to use it for communication or for accessing the web? There's different options out there for both, but the ones that I've described here, you can really use for everything. They're pretty good all-around hitters. I'm going to show you guys too, I have a video of Windows 10 being used with a Tobii 4C, I think it is. Let me go down here. I don't think there's sound, but I can kind of describe what's going on. So basically, there will be a bar at the top of your computer screen when you plug in this eye tracker. So if you look up at like left click, for example, the icon at the top bar, and then look at the icon Internet Explorer, it'll just click that for you and open it. Same thing, he's going to open a document here, and then you can open an on-screen keyboard. So that'll pop up. And then he can just be looking at the letters and it'll start typing it. So he's typing, I think like, hi, my name is Keith or something like that. This on-screen keyboard is nice too because it does have predictive text. So you can get somebody even quicker. They're starting to type sentences and just using the predictions at the very top there.
This is the Windows 10?
Yes, yep. So this is the Windows 10 eye control that's in beta. So if you have Windows 10, it's there. And if you just get like a cheap eye tracker, you'll be able to do what he's doing on the screen here.
How much are eye trackers?
So if you go to the Windows 10, if you look up Windows 10 eye control, it'll tell you all the eye trackers that are compatible. The Tracker 4C and the other one that I had on here, the iX, those are both compatible eye trackers. So $99 for the iX and $149 for the 4C. So pretty inexpensive.
So do they scan like to get to the letter, and if they're on it for so long, it clicks that letter? Is it an eye blink that gets them?
It's just a dwell. So there's a few options. Dwell selection is what I've used the most. So it literally translates your eye movements into your mouse movements. Okay. So it's not like you're having to scan the rows or anything. You look directly at the letter, and then if you hover on that letter with your eyes for whatever number of seconds you determine as a therapist or caregiver, whatever, it'll then just click that letter. Yeah, but you can also use switches. So if you have somebody where the dwell feature just isn't going to work for them, you could also use some external switches, and they could hit a switch when they are looking at the letter they want to look at. Does that make sense? I worked with a woman within the last year. I can't remember where she came to us from. She had a pretty severe brainstem stroke, kind of like locked-in syndrome. So she knew what she wanted to get across in terms of her wants and needs and message, but we just didn't have a good way for her to do it. So initially when she was at, she was at Madonna. Mm-hmm. Initially when she was at Madonna, they were working on just simple letterboard and just simple like yes, no, whichever one she'd look at, that's how she'd communicate. So that's partner dependent. She can't be an independent communicator. It was totally appropriate for that point in her recovery. But as she improved a little bit, then we started to use eye gaze. So we used the Tobii Dynavox with her with the eye tracker. It's like the i15, I think is what we used. It's a bigger one. She had some, she had scarring on her corneas, so we had to have everything be pretty big. So I tried to get her the biggest device we could. And initially she was doing everything by eye gaze and then progressed from an upper extremity standpoint to be able to use some switches. So I'll talk about this one a little bit later, but she then progressed to using the white and orange switches. So she would push this one to move to like the next row or next letter, and then this one to select. So even if somebody has to start out with this, it doesn't mean that's where they have to end up. There's just a whole range of devices. Okay, so the next one is head controls. I'm seeing a ton of stuff out there for head controls development. SmartNav and Tracker Pro are probably two that you've heard of. It's when you wear the reflective dot on your forehead. I remember going to a lab at Monroe Meyer and practicing that when I was in OT school. Justine was there too, I'm sure. Those are okay, but they're pretty expensive. On the plus side, they are really quick, they're really accurate, but you do have to have somebody else put that on you unless you feel like wearing a reflective dot on your forehead all day. The cost for these ones, the SmartNav is $499 and the Tracker Pro is $995. The only difference between the two is that the Tracker Pro has accessible software that comes with it. So some options that I've been using that are a little bit more affordable and easier to transfer home with somebody. Sesame Enable is so cool. I was at Resna conference back in June or July, and the creator of Sesame Enable came to it. So Sesame Enable is basically a head-controlled way to access your Android phone or tablet. It uses that camera, kind of like I was describing before. The developer of this app actually showed us how he could play Angry Birds just using his head movement. So this one's pretty cool because if you hover over the icon you want, it'll ask if you want to click on it, hold and drag it to a different spot if you want to delete it. So it just gives you a lot more options. I'm going to start using this with one of our guys that we just got from Emmanuel, I think, that's got a high-level spinal cord injury. He doesn't have much movement at all. He's got a little bit of supination, but really needs to be accessing his phone. He's from Florida, so he's a long way from home. So it's important to keep him connected. So I'll be using that soon. I'm excited to try it out. They'll give you a 30-day free trial too. So if you guys ever just wanted to download it, it's just in the Google Play Store. It's only available for Android because Apple doesn't play well with others. So that's Sesame Enable. It's $20 a month. So it's a subscription service, which I hadn't seen before in the assisted tech world. And then I think for a facility, it's like $600 a month, or not a month, sorry, $600 a year. So I'm still kind of weighing the pros and cons to see if we want to do that or not. I love the Glass House. I've been using this a ton. We found out about this on Indiegogo, which is sort of like Kickstarter. It was like $100 when I bought it, and now I think it's like $349. But this is a head-controlled computer mouse. So I just push a button on the inside, and it'll pair right to my device. You just go under your Bluetooth settings, pair it, then wherever my head moves, that's where the mouse moves on the screen. This is a little bite plate down here, so when you get to whatever you want to click on, you just bite it. There's silicone covers that come with this too, and they're dishwasher safe, so you can make sure that if you're using it with numerous people, it's sanitary. I've got a video of this one to show you guys too, because I think this sometimes is a hard one to understand unless you can see it. Alex and I actually worked together with a gentleman who used this. He was an attorney who owned his own practice, had a high-level C4 complete spinal cord injury. Work was his life. We needed to get this guy back to work. He was a criminal defense attorney, so he was frequently in court and needed to take notes discreetly. So I couldn't use Dragon, obviously. He can't be talking out loud, taking notes, but had to find some way he could do this. So he used the Glass House with just a small Android tablet and was able to just kind of practice taking notes, just using something that like really just looks kind of like a pair of glasses. So this has been a good solution for that. The video I'm showing you is version 2. It now comes with a bunch of different switches. So that first one was a puff switch. So if somebody couldn't bite or that wasn't a good solution for them, they could just blow air onto this little switch that would sit right by their mouth. There's also a finger switch. I haven't thought of anybody who'd be appropriate to use that one. Maybe you guys would. And then there's also a foot switch. So now they've got a bunch of different options for access. This one now I think is $499. Have any of you guys heard of phone funds through the state of Nebraska? I'm trying to use phone funds to get this paid for one of my current residents that has a high-level spinal cord injury and is on Nebraska Medicaid. So there have been, this would be his way of accessing his Android phone. So we'll see if I'm successful. So,
what is phone funds? Is it?
phone funds, so it's through the Department of Health and Human Services, and on their website, it mostly talks about funding it for individuals in the state of Nebraska who are on Medicaid who don't have access to their phone for some reason. So it could be a vision impairment, it could be a hearing impairment, it could be motor. And the devices that they list on their website that they'll fund are really outdated. So I'm just going to try and see if maybe they'll pay for this, because it's actually a lot less expensive than everything they have on their website. So we'll let you know. The last one to mention on here for head control is Smile Mouse. This one works pretty well for the cost. You can get a free demo of this also on their website. This one is controlled by both your head movement and also facial gestures. So I tried this one. The downside is I felt like I was like having to move my head really, really far. But it really does respond well to just like a simple smile. That's why it's named that. Or just like a twitch of your mouth to do different kinds of clicks. All right, moving on to our next category. So mouth controls. We have the QuadJoy and the Tetra Mouse at QLI. But I wanted to mention the Integra mouse and the Joust as well. Those I need to get back into this, sorry. Unless you guys want to read all my notes. Those top three are all pretty similar. So they can all be clamped onto a desk, and you can just roll right up or sit in a chair right in front of it. This, again, would be good for somebody that doesn't have good upper extremity control or movement and needs to rely on either their lips, their chin, their mouth, or even blowing air in and out of a straw. So these top three are all pretty expensive. The Integra mouse has a wireless version, which is nice. That one's $2,500. And then the QuadJoy is $1,300. I have a guy up on our East Campus, which is our long-term care, that's using this to access his iTunes and to send emails. So for him, he just drives right up to it and he puts his mouth around the straw. Wherever he moves that straw, that's where the mouse goes. And then he can either do like a puff of air into it or sip air out of it. And that's how he does different mouse clicks and different commands. And all three of those work with Windows and Apple. It's just a USB plugin. It's a really easy setup for a therapist. The Tetra Mouse, though, has been really cool. This is a newer one. It's less expensive. I've had a couple people go home with these recently. They, first of all, just have fantastic customer service. This gentleman, it's, I think, a one-man operation, and he 3D prints the material. There's been just like a big push in 3D printing in the assistive tech world right now. So he 3D prints it, and basically you still clamp it onto the desk, but it's got all these adjustable joints so you can get it to just the right position. A lot of times that's a problem with computer accessibility. We just got somebody from Craig Hospital, gentleman in his 30s or 40s who had a stroke, and vision is really impaired. He's got some abnormal movement. We need to have just the right setup and just the right position of these devices for him to access it. So I like that the Tetra Mouse has just a ton of ways that you can change the position and alter it. So the Tetra Mouse has two knobs on it. One of them can move the mouse around, and then the other one can do the clicks. And the user can independently change the speed of the mouse within it too, which I think is really cool. That same gentleman that Alex and I worked with, who was the attorney, he also used one of these and very much enjoyed that he could change up his whole fantasy football roster every week really easily. And it just really is like a great way to have full access to your computer. So some things to watch out for. There have been, like I said, just a huge boom in 3D printing in assistive tech. So MakerBot is like a 3D printing giant. They did a big accessibility challenge with Google a few years ago and just challenged companies, Google challenged companies to try to come up with low-tech, affordable ways for people to access computers or technology who had some kind of physical impairment. So there are now just open source plans to their 3D printed mouth-controlled mouse on the internet.
MakerBot?
Yeah, it's supposed to be MakerBot, not MarkerBot, sorry. It's my bad. It is MakerBot. But we have a relationship with UNO and their biomechanics research building. So I was able to just send these plans over to the BRB, and they printed the parts out for me, and now we're just going to assemble it ourselves. There's also a foundation called the Neil Squire Society, and they just came out with something called the Lip Sync. It's another 3D printed mouth-controlled device that the plans are just free. If you have access to a 3D printer, you can just print this thing. And you can assemble all of it for under 300 bucks. I think that you don't have to be like an electrician or have any kind of like rehab engineering background to do these either. They're pretty simple plans, and the parts are really minimum. There's not a whole lot that goes into it. So that's Neil Squire Society Lip Sync, and then MakerBot is the other one. I've also looked at a couple of other websites, just speaking of 3D printing. Hackaday and Thingiverse also have a ton of 3D printed devices on there. Not even just assistive tech related, but they had, I do our driving program too, and key extenders are like 300 bucks, I found out. That's ridiculous. So we got them to print a key extender for us. So I have somebody that doesn't have enough function in his hand to actually like turn the key. So we just printed it and screwed it right onto his. It cost us less than $1. So I would encourage you guys to look at that if you do have any connections with anyone that's got a 3D printer, or maybe wanted to make some connections with some local universities. It's been definitely like a win-win situation for us with UNO. They have students that need to complete projects. We have projects that need to be completed. So would definitely encourage that. Things you want to think about with mouth-controlled devices. Again, if they've got some abnormal movement, this might not be the best option for them. And with mouth-controlled, a lot of times you are going to need to help them set it up. So my guy that uses the QuadJoy up on our East Campus, he'll drive right up to it, but then he does need a caregiver to position it in the right spot for his mouth because he's not always positioned completely the same in his power wheelchair day to day. So those are just some things to think about. And then direct selection. Direct selection, like it says there, is kind of an umbrella term. Basically, you push a switch or a button or you look at something and an action happens. So an everyday example would be you flip a light switch and the light turns on. So it can refer to just a selection of different ways to compensate for physical, cognitive, and again, communication deficits. So we'll start with the physical deficits and using direct selection for that. We use styluses a lot. I would think that maybe that's something that you guys would potentially use here if you have somebody that's got better proximal control, but distally they still don't have the ability to really isolate a finger or to grasp like a stylus or something like that. These ones are some alternative options. So the Handies app, I have one here. This was actually created by a younger guy that had a C5, C6 injury and just felt like there wasn't anything out there for him to really be able to access his phone. So it's just a little ring stylus and it's adjustable. So it can fit really a variety of different finger sizes, can really go at any angle. Sometimes I've had these kind of slide around a little bit. So in those cases, I've just made them like a buddy kind of like splint out of thermoplast. So it'll actually hold it still. So these have been really cool. Again, designed for those with limited hand function. This tip is replaceable too. When you buy one of these, they send you with like 5 different tips and it's really, really accurate and responsive. So we've liked using this one. The limitless stylus has been really cool because a lot of people tell me that, okay, when I give them a U-cuff and put a stylus in it, they can't see their screen at all of their tablet or their phone. So this one's nice because it goes over kind of like the back of their hand. So it's also sort of like a wrist strap orthosis and a stylus all in one. And that little stylus point comes right over their index finger. So it's not impeding their view as much as holding a stylus this way would do. I like another one that I just saw. A father of one of my residents just brought this in last week, so it didn't even make it on my slide. But there's something called an X-Tylus, E-X-T-Y-L-U-S. He found it on Amazon. I think it was like 25 bucks. And rather than having it be mounted to the wrist, it just Velcros onto your finger. And same thing, just has a stylus tip that kind of goes over it. This guy that's using it has a high-level spinal cord injury, but he has started to get some arm movement. So for him, His phone is mounted right by his wheelchair joystick. He can get his hand up on the joystick, and then he can just move his arm a little bit to be able to access the screen. He can access his phone a lot of other ways too, but this feels the most normal for him, and so he's been really excited to get to try something like this. And he's on his phone a lot, so he gets lots of repetition, which has been good. I don't have this one yet, but I want to buy it. I learned about this one at a conference. So I think it's the Caduceus stylus with a salt tip. This one is really flexible, so it can accommodate, if somebody's got a contracted hand or if they've got something going on where they wouldn't be able to use any of the other options mentioned. This one can kind of accommodate any kind of grasp. You can also use it as a mouth stick. We don't really use those as much anymore. Most of the time people don't like using the mouth sticks because it's really obvious that they're using something to compensate. But this one is also pretty subtle and is kind of good because it can just be custom fitted for a lot of different kinds of people. A little less expensive, it's $22. This one, I've been emailing this girl forever. It is still not FDA approved in the United States, but I love the concept of this. This one is kind of like a mouth stick, so that's a little bit of the downside, but it's more of like a sip and puff kind of mouth stick. So if you have a device that's mounted up in front of you, if you just give this stylus like a little puff of air, it shoots out that touch function at the end where it's kind of like those little that little thing that comes out at the end and hits the letter. So even just like a tiny amount of air, that'll shoot that out and you can hit the letter. Somebody had talked about this at the conference I was at too, and it sounds like maybe they got to try it, but pretty accurate. Sometimes you run the risk with styluses of them not actually registering a touch on the screen, but this one doesn't seem to have that problem. Pretty high price tag though, at least right now. And then the Bluetooth switch, I use this probably on a daily basis. I had to hunt it down from one of my speech therapists this morning because she had it. Have any of you guys seen this one? This is, like, if you get one thing, I would get this for switch control access. You can plug 4 different switches into this in addition to using the 2 existing ones. So the problem with iPads and Android tablets is you can't directly plug a switch into them. You need some kind of interface. This one's really nice because it's Bluetooth. So you basically, if you have any kind of switch that works with this person, you can make it Bluetooth enabled. You just plug the switches into here and then go into your phone, add the Bluetooth device, and you're hitting the ground running. You can also use these 2 switches, like I talked about with the woman that had the brainstem stroke. This is what she used. So we really like this one. This is one of the few things that works with iOS, Apple devices. Really works with everything, as you can see. And this one's available from AbleNet. I think they're the only ones that sell it. Mouse emulation is probably what I use the most for phone access if someone's in a power wheelchair. So these power wheelchairs they're so much better in terms of the technology that's built into them now than they used to be. I think when I first started at QLI, so even like 3 years ago, I would have to request an additional Bluetooth module be added to a chair because these chairs weren't Bluetooth enabled. Now you can connect to like 8 different devices with the newest quantum chairs. So that has been really, really helpful. And basically, if you guys didn't know with this one, whatever the person uses to drive their power wheelchair, they can also use to access their device. So we still have a gentleman, he's been with us for a long time, he has Guillain-Barré, and hopefully this is interesting because you guys are sending us someone, I hear, next week, we're really excited, who also has Guillain-Barré, but he needed to access his phone. So for him, he was using a head array at that time to drive his power wheelchair. So we were able to just pair his phone to his head array, so he could use the different functions built into those, just hit those pads, and that would control his phone. So basically with the head array, the pad, so left, forward, backward, and right, those can all act as separate switches to control your phone. So we had his setup where hitting to the right was move to the next icon on his phone, hitting to the left was move to the previous, forward was the home button, because you can't tell Siri to hit your home button or go to your home screen, which is stupid. And hitting it twice, I think brought up like the app, all of his apps or something like that. So there's just a lot of customizability. So once again, talking just Android versus Apple, Have you guys ever seen switch control with an Apple device? You might have accidentally turned it on your phone once. That happens a lot, where like a blue box shows up around your icons. Switch control is just built into the iPhone. So it's exactly kind of what I just said. A blue box will show up around, your messages. And then if you hit a button, it'll go to your settings. Hit a button, it'll go to your phone. So it's kind of tedious having to do that one-step scanning. If you pair Wheelchair to an Android device, a mouse shows up on the phone or the tablet, and you just drive it around using your joystick or your head array or your sip and puff straw. So it's a lot more direct. The downside is I have a heck of a time setting up Android devices sometimes because it's different with every device. So if you have a Samsung phone versus Google Pixel or whatever it might be, totally different setups. At least with the Apple devices, it's always the same and it's consistent, but it is just tedious. So if somebody's a little more impatient or really high level injury, I try to steer them more towards Android devices. And I'm not a speech therapist, and I normally do this with a speech therapist. So are any of you speech therapists? You can just come up here and do this if you want to. Feel free to jump in and save me at any time. So we also just wanted to talk about how we're using technology to address communication, cognition, memory deficits as well. So from just a communication standpoint, I'm sure you guys have heard of Proloquo. That's used a lot. I like this because it's really customizable, and you have kind of like your core words on the main page, but then there's fringe folders on the side. So you can get really, I feel like with this one, it can really be like properly constructed sentences, So if you're using the app to actually speak your sentence, it sounds more grammatically correct. We had a girl who was in her 20s who had a brain injury. She was hit by a car. You would never have known that she had any kind of injury. She was doing really well physically and could really cover up her communication deficits because she was just really good with social cues. But this was so nice for her. She did not want to use anything that was really obvious, a compensatory device. But Proloquo, we could take pictures of her own things. So pictures of her own curling iron and her own makeup and her own room, rather than having the more adolescent looking kind of images. So that's a nice feature. It's kind of expensive though, right? So it's like $250 I think for the app. We've also used Talk Tablet at QLI. Pretty similar. It's another AAC app. This one's only $80. And I've just heard from our speech therapist that it's maybe a little easier to set up and the customer support might be a little bit better. So another option. And this one for Talk Tablet, you can really use on all platforms. So it works on Windows, Apple. I guess you can even use it on your Kindle. I don't know how, but it's being done. Whereas Proloquo, you can only use with Apple. Am I accurate so far? Okay. Go ahead.
So my question is, when we got a Dynavox, the insurance paid $7,000 for that or whatever, and then we switched to iPad, and this has been years ago. They wouldn't pay for that. So now our insurance companies, if it's justifiable communication device, do they pay for iPads or phones or?
That's, I haven't tried it with iPads. We're kind of fortunate because we have a pretty sizable grant specifically for tablets, iPads, and Android devices. So if somebody really can't afford it, we've been able to gift them to them. So at least at my time at QLI, I haven't tried, but I can definitely ask our speech therapist about that one. In terms of the other devices, though, we did, with that woman that had the brainstem stroke, they did pay for the Tobii for her. It took a long time, but they came around to it. And that was probably around that same price range. They're still pretty expensive.
It has to be a device designated for communication. So.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing is with it, you can use it for lots of other things, though. So for her, it was her communication device, but she also controlled her TV using infrared through that, and she emailed through that. So it's how she could keep in touch with her husband on a daily basis and her kids. So there's a lot of other benefits, but you're right, it does definitely have to be specified as a communication device. Okay, and then cognitive. We just use the simple apps that are built into your phone a lot of the time. So the calendar is a great aid for that. Our residents at QLI all have Gmail schedules, so we sync their calendar to their device if they have one. And we'll have them a lot of times end the session by putting notes in about what they worked on, so they can kind of refer back to that. The notes section too, you can add collaborators in the notes app. So that's been kind of nice. Personally, I have a grocery list app or note on my phone that my husband's on. So if he's out and about, he can get things. But that's nice if you have somebody who maybe they have a collaborative note with like a family member or a caregiver, and they're both able to add and edit it. That's just something that's, again, built into the device. And then these are 3 different apps that our speech therapists use, again, from more of like a memory comp and organizational standpoint. Google Keep is a nice one because it's really simple. It just looks like sticky notes up on your screen. It is connected to your Google Drive. So when you're in like your Google account checking your mail or the Drive, you can also just click on Keep. And it's basically just a digital collection of Post-it notes. You can change the font size and the order to reflect the importance of it. So I think that's nice, just a nice visual reminder and like prioritizing the notes for folks. So in this image, the top secret for now, that's pinned to be the first note, and it's got a larger font. So that one's really simple from a cognitive standpoint. OneNote and Trello are a little bit more difficult. Anybody that went to Creighton was forced to use OneNote the entire time they were there, so you're probably familiar with that. It's kind of like a giant, how you can buy those like 5 subject notebooks at Target. It kind of reminds me of that, but a digital version of it. So you've got your tabs at the top and can make lists, task lists, to-do lists within that, as well as just keep notes. You can also add in images in there. You can put in like audio files. So that's a pretty robust one. It's a Microsoft product. And then Trello, I have not personally used, but Jen, one of our speech therapists, uses this one quite a bit with some of her higher functioning adults that have had strokes or brain injuries. So Trello was actually, it's free, which is a big plus. It was designed to be a project management application, but it's a really great note-taking app. And again, looks really just like clean from a visual standpoint, so it's not as confusing as just having a ton of content on the page. So an area that we've been really excited to get into is smart home technology. We have been doing a whole lot with this, and this is another one that's like hard to keep up with because things are changing so often. So I have an Amazon Echo. We've got probably like, I don't know, maybe around like 10 of them at QLI. So if we have somebody who would really be appropriate to use an Echo, either to control like their light switch or a fan, we've also used them as speech therapy devices. They will pick up like the strongest accent and more like dysarthric speech. It's really, really highly accurate for that. We've also used them to set alarms. I worked with a girl that had cortical blindness as a result of her injury. So this was a really good like orientation device for her to kind of say, okay, what day is it? What time is it? What do I have on my schedule today? And you can get an Echo Dot now for like $39. So they're pretty darn affordable. They're coming out with new devices all the time. I just saw last week that Amazon now has an Alexa-enabled microwave. I don't know. It's like $50 too. It's really inexpensive. So I have not looked into that one, but I sure will. It sounds exciting. They also have like the Amazon Show is the one with the screen in it. I have a lot of people who go home and they're wondering what they can use as a call light system when they're not in the hospital anymore. If you are a mom and you're taking your child home with you who's had an injury, I think it's probably pretty understandable that a lot of them aren't sleeping or they're in there constantly checking on them. So the Amazon Shows have been cool because they have the video screen, and Amazon has a drop-in feature where I could say, Alexa, drop in on Alex's Echo, and it'll show me a video screen. It'll connect to Alex's Echo and kind of show like her room. So I could just kind of see how she's doing. So we've had people use that as call light options. You can set reminders on it. Our neuropsychologist likes to walk by my office and set my alarm for various times throughout the day and remind me to do things. So they can be used for evil as well as good. And then people ask me sometimes which one's better, Google Home or Amazon Echo. I personally think Amazon is a little bit ahead of the game. They've been out a little bit longer. And in terms of pairing with smart home technology, which is mostly what I use it for, they are just better. They have more things that they can pair to than the Google Home. They also now have Amazon Echoes that have hubs built into them. So before, if you bought like smart light bulbs, you couldn't just install them and say, Alexa, turn my lights on. You had to have kind of a hub that was like the intermediary device. Now the Alexas just have the hub built in, so it's really simple. I've paired light bulbs, outlets. Again, if there's like one thing you buy a smart home, I tell people to get one of these. This is just a little Wemo outlet. So anything that you would want to plug into this, you can control using your voice. It could be, they have examples on here that are kind of funny. It's like disco ball and curling iron. Yeah, lamps, fans, disco balls, curling irons, and lava lamps. But a big thing is just like the lights and the fans, I think. You know, it's not a little thing that somebody wouldn't have to ask to turn a light on or off. Like, that's a big deal, and I think we all know that. This is stuff that really gives people some dignity back and some control over their environment. So this one's like, again, $30.
What's that called again?
This is called a Wemo Mini outlet. You can get these off of Amazon, and I just keep a whole bunch of these in stock for our residents to trial while they're at QLI. I want to make sure that they're comfortable using this stuff rather than just saying, okay, go home and buy it. I will tell you, these are really hard to use in like a hospital environment because you guys probably have security and firewalls up. So what we've had to do, I've had our IT team set up like isolated Wi-Fi networks for certain residents' rooms that are using these. So we've got like a number of rooms now on campus that are more like smart rooms. I'm also having a lot more people come to QLI with devices. So they're coming from Madonna or Craig Hospital or Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and they already have an Amazon Home and a couple, or an Amazon Echo or Google Home and a few outlets. So if you guys do send people to us, that this is stuff that we're able to set up in their room and train them on.
Those can be used via the app as well.
Yeah, yep. Right. So if you have somebody that can't control it through voice, they can just control it through their smartphone. The gentleman I referenced before who has his own IT company and knows more about this stuff than I do, he has a whole like smart home setup in his house already in Maryland. So if he wants his wife to call him, he'll go into his app and start flashing their lights on and off. And then she knows that he wants her to call him. So there's lots of uses. Okay, so Google Home, we have one of these too. The things that Google Home is better at is follow-up questions. So if you were like, what team does LeBron James play for? What's his jersey number? It would know that your second question had to do with the first one. Amazon can't do that. And then a big thing that I've noticed, I just found out about lately, Amazon Echo does not, you cannot set the language to Spanish. Yeah, so you can set it to French, Chinese, and German, and not Spanish. I know. And I have somebody that I have named all of his devices in Spanish, so he has to say like, Alexa, turn on the luz instead of the light. So I changed one word for him. But Google Home can speak Spanish. So if you have somebody that would be a good candidate, this would be a better option for them, at least right now. Okay. So then I just wanted to mention some things that we're working on at QLI and some things that are kind of on the horizon in terms of assistive technology. We are doing a lot with virtual reality for a couple of different ways. So we're using it really as an upper extremity therapy tool right now, which has been kind of fun. We're partnering with UNO, and they have developed, with Jean Peck, who's a hand therapist at somewhere around here, they've developed a hand-based orthosis that's EMG triggered, and it can be paired with the Oculus Rift. So we're at the point now where they've developed the orthosis, and they're working on the connection with the Oculus Rift in that hand. So the idea would be the user would be playing a game, and if it would detect any kind of muscle twitch, it would facilitate their hand closing in order to grasp an object in their virtual environment. So that's been fun because I don't know how to develop a game, but they don't know what movements we would want to be used from a therapeutic standpoint. So it's been a really good partnership. We've also been doing some research with UNMC. They have had a student that has been working with me and doing kind of like an upper extremity protocol using the Oculus Rift. So we've had residents who have had strokes, brain injuries, and spinal cord injuries kind of going through this. We've tried to have it be a 6 to 8 week protocol, assuming they're there that long, which is always a challenge. And then now we're on the point where we're collecting data for our control group. So we're looking at, are they having improvements in their box and blocks, manual muscle testing, grip and pinch, 9-hole peg, and looking at before or after. So to be continued on that. Robotics with eStim, that's kind of what I was alluding to with the UNO project, but I've also tried using, when I've had somebody on the FES bike, we've just had the Oculus on them, and they've been watching a video from the vantage point of a cyclist. So rather than staring at the screen on the FES bike, which is like a cartoon, they can actually be immersed in a real-world cycling environment. And at least for one gentleman who's done it, and this is just the one person, but his power output doubled, and his distance traveled like almost doubled too. So you just add that motivation factor on there, and can kind of see some cool results. The thing I like with VR too is just the amount of repetition you get. So you have something that's motivating, you can get a ton of repetitions. That's really what we want. BCI, brain-computer interfacing, there are always things coming out about that. They've been talking about BCI for like 50 years. I think it's still a long ways off, but the idea with that is just by having, you know, your thoughts essentially controlling what's happening on your computer, which is wild, but it is being worked on. And then adaptive gaming has been an area I've been trying to get into. Not a gamer, don't know anything about it, but we see a younger population, got a lot of guys in their teens and 20s that want to play their Xbox, so we're trying to find a way to do it. This was really cool, and I think just a testament to how these companies are becoming so much more inclusive of the disability population. If you guys saw, Xbox and Microsoft teamed up to create an adaptive controller. So this controller here, we pre-ordered it in the spring, and I just got it like last week. So it's obviously a lot bigger and can sit on the individual's lap. These are like their A and B buttons and their D-pad. And then the really neat thing is that there's 19 switch ports on the back here. So literally like anybody with any ability can play an Xbox using this. The huge news with this was the price tag, $90. So there's different websites out there that will like custom make controllers, but you're talking like $500 and above, $90. And then it's just really plugging in switches and figuring out where you want to mount them so that the person can be successful playing the game. So pretty fun. So that's a lot of talking. Do you guys have any questions?
Can something like that be used to, could it be paired with with a device?
This guy here. So right now this is only going to be able to control your Xbox, and I think it might only be Xbox One too. But you know, depending on thinking about some of those other methods that I talked about, there are so many ways for somebody to access a computer or a tablet or a phone. It's just what is the right way to do it. I have not, at least recently, had a situation where we just can't find something for somebody because the options are seriously just endless right now. So I know that you guys have your gentleman that's coming next week. Does anybody work with this guy?
I don't know for sure when it's coming.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll give an example. So a gentleman with Guillain-Barré. I'm currently working with someone with Guillain-Barré. We've been just so lucky that he lives locally, and I know this gentleman does too. So for my guy, I was able to go out to his house and actually do a home evaluation in person, and he has a whole smart home system installed in his home. For them, they had the funds to be able to pay for kind of a higher tech system. We've got 2 apartments on QLI's campus that we call simulation apartments, and they're completely smart home controlled. So the blinds, the thermostat, the TV, the lights, the door are all controlled through an Amazon Echo using one application. So for this gentleman with Guillain-Barré, he was in that room at QLI the entirety of his stay. So he got daily practice with this technology, which made it so much less intimidating to then say, okay, yeah, I'm going to shell out the money to have this installed in my house. So he actually has a voice-controlled lift, like an elevator. So when he gets out of his vehicle, he can tell Alexa to call up the lift. The door automatically opens, and he can get onto the platform. It lowers him down, and then he's got full control of the thermostat, all of the windows along his basement, and their TVs. And they use the Amazon shows. So his wife, whose room is on the top floor can just say, drop in on Bob's Echo and just see how he's doing and see if he needs anything. So he gets a little bit more privacy, a little bit more independence, and he can be left at home alone safely because he has a safe means of getting in and out of the house. So if we didn't have that kind of stuff in place, we really couldn't recommend that he go home without 24-hour support, because in the event of some kind of an emergency, he'd have no way to get out of this house. So it's just meant a lot more freedom for him. And it doesn't have to be that crazy high-tech system. We can piece it together with Wemos and Nest learning thermostats and Philips Hue light bulbs. Our adaptive tech lab at QLI came in under like $600, and everything's smart home controlled. So this stuff can be affordable. You can take it home. Yeah.
Do you work on an outpatient basis or only residents only? Do you have?
I only work with, me personally, I only work with current residents at QLI. There have definitely been situations where somebody has gone home after QLI and they've been more open to using these things as they've adapted to their injury a little bit more. We definitely follow up for up to 5 years after somebody discharges. So I've certainly followed up with former residents, but at least right now only working with current. Yeah. Anything else from you guys?
With all the smart home and stuff, I'm guessing it's all based on power. Is there backups that you put into the house that if the power would go out, that they can still get out and that type of thing?
Right. Yeah, you have to think about that with his lift for sure. So he has a backup generator. So in that situation, they had the means to private pay for that. I had another gentleman who went home and he was work comp. So this is all stuff I can justify from a medical standpoint. And so they paid for him to have a backup generator too, in case his system were to go down. Mm-hmm.
Somebody being so dependent.
Yeah. Yep. And I always make sure they have multiple means of accessing it. So kind of like you were saying, it's not just that they can use Alexa. I make sure they can also access the app on their phone. And if they get that higher tech system I was talking about, they'll mount touch screens on the walls of the home too. So then you have another method of access. Mm-hmm.
That higher tech system you're talking about is not provided through Alexa? Like that's all?
It's not. No, it's called Control4. There's a company here in Omaha called Home Theaters, etc. that's been fantastic to work with, and they install that. And I liked that system for the 2 guys I talked about because they were not tech savvy, and it would have overwhelmed them to try to problem solve like if their Wemo switch disconnected. So the nice thing with going with that higher tech system is that you also get the service. And that it's not me being called to do it, which I'm happy to do, but you know, that's tricky when we have full caseloads too. And there is a service now in Omaha, so it's called Assistology, if any of you have heard of it. Megan Walls is a rehab engineer by trade. She started it. It's really new, but I know she's interested in getting into like community-based AT. So if you do need someone to refer to, she might be a good one to keep in mind. Okay. I know we're almost up on time, so I do have cards up here if any of you want to grab one or if you want to see any of the devices up close. But thank you guys for your attention. Thanks for letting us come back.
Thank you.